Man, sorry. Sorry about everything. I've completely 100% forgot I was so oversleeping. uh, Either way, is well, I don't think anyone is here yet, but I started reading this, so I will be ending reading this at this point. Uh, Anyways, I will just say if I'm, let me check one last thing before starting. Very sad. Oh, what? Well, that doesn't matter anymore. I think I will just start reading it. Although I wanted to put something behind, I guess I'm gonna put this. But at this point, I guess it's the most complete version of whatever the hell this was. Made it the size of my this new thing. Oh, it's bad. uh, Yes, sometimes shit like this happens. This, where are you? Didn't realize I had that. Oh, I see. Okay, now it looks better. Okay, let's start the read. Oh yeah, I forgot to say I'm streaming. Okay, man, I, I guess I overslept. What else? What else? What else? I think I'm finished. Yes, I have everything I need. So yeah, where were we? On the last, the grave was open. See? Wait, no. Uh, the grave was opened on the last chapter, on chapter 17. We know about chapter 12 of Men. We discovered that there's a few characters, and there's a possibility that someone related to someone did something. I'm starting to think that it has to be in relation to some other people. And we're going to know what's inside the grave, which was a cliffhanger last time. Oh, hey, T-Buggins, how are you? Was a cliffhanger last time. Inside the grave, let's see. Hey, oh no, we're not going to tell you exactly at this moment. Hey, where have you two been? Inspector Isokawa was sitting in the veranda of the main building, watching Kosuke and Jinso walking back from the visit to the cat's grave. I just went for a walk. A walk around the garden. Yep, that's right. Isokawa looked at the two men up and down. Jinso's ashen face was unmissable. What's wrong? Did something happen? No. What do you mean? We are fine. Seriously, what have you got there? Oh, this? Hanging from Kosuke's hand was an object wrapped in a bundle inside of a large handkerchief. He swung it nonchalantly. A souvenir, he grinned. A souvenir. Right, but Inspector, perhaps you shouldn't ask so many questions. How about a few answers? What happened with Saburo? Yes, well, I think you better sit down. Kosan, are you feeling alright? You look very pale. What? Oh, we have been talking about God's murder. Of course he's feeling miserable. Right now, so what did Saburo tell you? Well, he was rambling, rather, but I really think that this time you have to share the blame, Kindaichi-san. You're joking. Me? Go on. Yesterday, you were having a heated discussion with Saburo about detective novels. Well, it seems that provoked him. You were talking about lockroom murders, weren't you? Saburo decided to try to solve this lockroom case himself. So last night, he sneaked into the annex house. I see. So what then? Well, he locked the door completely from the inside. In other words, he was trying to recreate the conditions exactly as they were in the night of the murder. But as he was doing that, he got the feeling that there was someone in the closet behind the Konoma alcove. There wasn't really any noises. It was just a feeling. He thought he could hear someone breathing. So eventually, he couldn't help it. Had to go take a look. So, yes, so Sarah opened the closet doors, and the man jumped out, brandishing a sword. Of course, Saburo screamed and tried to run away, but he only got so far as the large tatami room, before his shoulder and the screen were slid open. After he was in a daze, and he doesn't remember anymore. He doesn't have any recall making this way to the Genkan door. I see. And what did the attacker look like? He only got a glimpse of him in the dark, and on top of that, he was startled, so he says he didn't get a proper look at his face. I think that's very likely under the circumstances. But he did say that he appeared to be wearing an oversized surgical mask. Well, that's about it. I suppose he didn't get a look at the man's fingers either then. Of course not, he didn't have time to check something like that. However, from the bloody fingerprint on the left hand, I think we can conclude that it was none other than the three-fingered man. Kosuke and Ginsu exchanged glances. And then? Was that all Saburo had to say? Well, yes, that was about it. I really hoped to hear more precise account, but I was disappointed. I was disappointed in Daichi-san. This case is really beginning to weigh heavily on me. There's this other man, Taya, to deal with, too. I can't even tell whether he was any connection to the three-fingered man. It makes my damn face ache. Come on, please, don't take it so hard. There'll be some good news anytime now. Kosuke got to his feet. I forgot to tell you about it, but the detective there was here before. What's his name? I sent him to H Village. Oh, you mean Kimura? What minute did you have to him in H Village? There was something I needed him to take a look into for me. Anyways, Uncle, shall we be going? Where are you two off to? It sounded almost like a challenge. Oh, just for a walk. We're going to take a little stroll over the way. Spectre, you'll be here for a while, will you? Tsukawa looked suspiciously at Kosuke. So, if you are, Kosuke continued blithely, would you mind asking Ryuji-san something for me? He claims to have arrived here on the morning after the murders. However, just after midday, the day before, in other words, on the 25th, the day of the wedding, he was seen getting off a train at N station. The witness appears to be telling the truth. Would you mind asking Ryuji-san why he lied to us? What did you say? No, Inspector. There really is no call to impersonate me. Uncle, let's go. With that, Kosuke and Ginso left to the inspector sitting on the veranda, dumbstruck. They made their way around the house to the Black Gate. This gate was on the west side of the property, and was where the mysterious three-fingered man had apparently entered the grounds on the day of the wedding. The two men went through it and found themselves at a stream, the large, and ran along the west side of the residence. They followed the path and ran along the riverbank towards the north. Kosan, where are you going? I'm not sure, but the dog that trots around finds the bone. Let's try trotting around this area. Kosuke's handkerchief, wrapped a mandel, still swung from his hand. They followed the stream in a northerly direction until they reached the mill, with this water wheel. The wheel was not currently turning. Right after the bridge by the mill, the path became extra narrow, made a sharp bend to the east, and began to climb up the cliff edge. Kosuke and Ginso rounded the bend and came to face with a sizable pond. This part of the Okayama prefecture was famous for its rice cultivation, and many ponds had been created for irrigation purposes, so this kind of feature was not all unusual. However, at the sight of the particular pond, Kosuke stopped dead and stared into the depths. Then he called out to a passing farmhand. Excuse me, do you drain this pond every year? Yes, we do. Has it already been done this year? No, not yet. It meant to be done every 25th of November, but this year, well, what with everyone busy and helping with the big event at the Chianagi place, it put off until the 5th of next month. Kosuke looked disappointed. I see. And the Chianagi family knows about this, of course? Yes, they know. The pond was dug up by the old head of the family, Sokue. So whenever we're going to drain it, we go and ask permission at the Chianagi house. No real meaning onto it, but it appears to be a custom. I see. Thank you. They left the farmhand behind and continued up the path along the cliff edge. Ginso didn't ask, but it was clear that Kosuke knew exactly what he was asking for. So Ginso just followed it around silently. After a while, there was a visible curve in the line on the edge of the hill. Ah, there it is. Kosuke called out that they arrived to the curve of the path. Just beyond there was a narrow path of flat land, and on it, there was a small semi-cylindrical structure made from clay. Just over 20 square feet in size. It was a charcoal kiln. Kiln? I know what it is, but I don't know how to pronounce it. There were no professional charcoal makers out here in the country. The local folks were quite canny at saving money and would make charcoal from their own personal use. Farmers would construct their own kiln from bricks and clay. Each one was built on a very small scale. It could have managed no more than 6 or 7 bags at a time, or at the most about 12. A typical kiln was scarcely bigger than this one, and height-wise came up to about the chest level of a man. Kosuke and Ginso had come across one of those kilns. From the carbonized stick that was protruding from it, it seems that someone has just finished making a batch of charcoal. Kosuke ran over and bent down to peer in through the narrow opening. Inside was a man with a handkerchief wrapped around his hand. Down on his hand and knees, scraping up the fragments of charcoal. It looked as if he had almost got all the pieces out. Hey there! At the sound of Kosuke's voice, the man stopped and looked around. I got a question for you. Could you come out for a moment? The man continued to rummage in the clean a while, but eventually emerged still on all 4 legs. He brought with him 2 bamboo baskets filled with charcoal. The man's face and hands were black and with ash, besides 2 bright points in the middle. What do you want? When did you light the fire to make this batch of charcoal? It's a very important question, so please answer truthfully. In the countryside, whenever something unusual happens, news spreads very quickly. It had been common knowledge since the previous day that the short and remarkable youth in the shabby hakama was a famous detective from the city. The farm, slightly flustered by the appearance of the famous detective at this charcoal kiln, began to count on the knobby fingers. Let's see. I must have lit the furnace on the evening of the 25th. Yes, without a doubt, it was the day after the Chianagi wedding. And the wood? When did you put it in? Ah, yes, the timber. I put that in the day before, so the 24th. But I'd only got about half of it done before nightfall, so I went home. Then the following evening, I stuffed the rest, branches, and lit the furnace. Did the two visit? Did any notice anything had changed? Anything that stuck to you as strange? Now that you mention it, after I set fire on the evening of the 25th, I came back later the night from time to time to check on it. Yes, it was it. Definitely on the 25th. It was snowing heavily. Anyway, the cook have sworn there was a strange smell coming from the kiln. A foul sting, like burning skin. I thought that the cat or something had got mixed in with the firewood, but no, someone had been playing a prank. They stuck a dirty old clothes and a pair of shoes in through the chimney. I pulled them out. The pile of clothes that he indicated was burned beyond recognition, but despite having been turned completely black, the shoes had kept their shape. Kosuke poked them with a stick. May I take a look inside the kiln? Yes, but there's nothing left there. Willing to his hammer trailing in the charcoal ash, Kosuke stooped down and entered the kiln. Could have been heard scrabbling about in the darkness a while before emitting a wild shriek. Wait, come here! Yes? Said the charcoal maker. Ha, everyone, presumably today, please, would you run down the Ichiyanagi place and get the police inspector come here right now? If any of the local police or the detectives are there too, could you bring them to join? Oh, and get them to bring some shovels with them too. What shall I tell them? They will find out soon enough. Please hurry. Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Kosuke. Kosan, is that clear? Is it? Kosuke nodded briefly, confirming Ginzo's suspicious. He gulped and didn't ask anything further. Kosuke also kept silent. Above them, in the late autumn sky, they could hear birds singing. After a while, Inspector Isokawa turned up with one of his junior detectives and a local police constable. The latter two with shovels in their hands. They looked slightly out of breath and very curious. Kandari said, "What's going on? Inspector, let's dig up the ground in the bottom of the kiln. There's a corpse buried underneath." A corpse? Bleated the charcoal makers, sounding exactly like an injured goat. The police constable and the young detective paid him no attention. They made for the entrance of the kiln, but Ginzo stopped them. "Just a minute. I don't think you'll be able to dig like that." He turned to address the charcoal maker. "It's your killing, is it?" "Yes." "Right then. Of course, we will reimburse you later, but this outer shell will have to be knocked down." By shell, he meant the roof of the kiln. "Well, I don't mind, but a corpse? A corpse in here? That's crazy." The charcoal maker looked as if he were about to burst into tears any moment. The constable and the junior detective set about bashing the semi-cylindrical roof of the kiln. It was a simple structure, built by a layman, out of clay, so it didn't prove difficult. As soon as the hole was large enough for the interior to be filled with light, the two law officers shammed down the interior. Inspector Isokawa, Kosuke, and Ginzo watched above. They began to dig. It wasn't long before part of a man's leg became visible, one that had turned into a grotesque color. "Ah, it's naked," said the junior detective in disgust. "Hindaichi, who is this? Does it have something to do with the case?" Never mind that for now. You'll soon see." The body was lying on its back. The policeman gradually exposed its emaciated belly, then worked upwards the chest. At the point, the detective let out a cry. "Ah, he was murdered all right. Look at the chest. That's a huge stab wound." "What the—" This time it was Kosa's turn to be startled. He let her something there. "Kosan," said the Imperial Scholar. "Surely you can't be surprised that this man was murdered." No, but hurry up, you two. Dig up the face." Inspector Isokawa commanded, and the police began to dig the region of the corpse's head. The detective called out to the third time, "Inspector, it's him! That's the man! See? It's the great long scar on his face. It's the three-fingered man." "What are you talking about?" Isokawa craned his neck to look at the corpse's face, and his eyes almost popped out of his skull. There was no mistake. There lay indescribable, revolting face of the dead man, with a long, stitched-up wound running from the right-hand corner of his top lip, up his right cheek. It was as if his mouth had been split open. "Hindaichi-san, this can't be. Hey, you two dig up his right hand." They dug, but this time all three, the junior detective, the police constable, and the Inspector Isokawa, let out a scream. "Oh, hello, Roblox. How are you?" Let out a scream. The corpse had no right hand. It had been completely severed at the wrist. "Hindaichi-san, don't worry, Inspector. Don't worry. This all makes sense. Here's your souvenir." Isokawa fixed Kosuke so hard with his bloodshot eyes that it seemed he was trying to bore a hole in his face. Eventually, those eyes dropped to the handkerchief bundle that Kosuke had handled him. I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. Just reading. Open it up. I found it in the cat's grave. There was no doubt that Inspector Isokawa had worked out by the feels of the package exactly what it contained. He took a deep breath and with a trembling finger undid the handkerchief, cut the string, and opened up the oil paper. Inside was a man's right hand, severed at the wrist. It had only 3 fingers: the thumb, the index, and the middle finger. Inspector, this is the stamp used to make all those bloody fingerprints. Oh, so to be exactly correct on what happened, the 3 finger man would be impossible to have been the one that killed all those people. He couldn't have been able to do it. It was a fast chapter, but finally it answered what was inside the grave. I was wondering, I have been wondering like all week what was in there. It was a hand. Crazy. But yeah, it completely removes one of the suspects. Now, the 300 man can't be the guy, although I figured out that he wasn't because it had to be one of the family, but makes sense now. Kosuke's Experiment. Chapter 14, Kosuke's Experiment. That evening, Kosuke Kindaichi solved the most bizarre murder case by way of an intriguing experiment. Kosuke issued a special invitation to Dr. F, asking for his assistance. The doctor made a detailed note on the events of the evening, so I am going to borrow those to tell the story. Other section of this note, it is clear that this doctor was generally, due to the nature of his job, a calm character, not easily perturbed, but on this particular occasion, his note revealed that he was astounded by the events that transpired. I will do my best to edit out much of the doctor's personal reactions, to relate the information that you, in as matter of fact, as style as possible. I do believe that is what befits the conclusion of this case, and so without further ado, I present the following section in the voice of Dr. F. I received the notice from that curious young man, Kosuke Kindaichi. He was planning to perform an experiment that night at the Ichiyanagi residence. It was shortly after the ghostly corpse of the 3-fingered man had been dug up. I performed an autopsy on the body right away. When I had finished, Kindaichi had a request for me. Whatever you have described about this body, no matter how strange, would you refrain from releasing it until I have finished my little experiment? I was surprised by his request. I had indeed found something totally unexpected during the autopsy. However, at the time, I had no idea why he didn't want me to reveal my findings. It wasn't until much later, that evening, that I would understand. Still couldn't help but be filled with admiration for this young man, with the mysterious, almost magical power of insight and observation. From what I heard, the police hadn't just happened to come across the corpse. Hideichi-san had directed them exactly where to dig. He must have known that the 3-fingered man was dead, and where he was buried. And then, in addition, he must have already realized the strange truth that would have emerged as a result of my autopsy. This young detective, with his ungainly manner, wild unshaveled hair, and stammered, had become to my eyes something of a genius. He didn't even hesitate to do as he requested. He was in a state of great anticipation, and looked forward to observation of this experiment. As the evening unfolded, as agreed, I arrived at the Chianagi residence around 9 p.m. and was directed to the next house. Detective Sergeant Kimura was on duty at the garden gate, and separated from the rest of the residents, but he left post to accompany me to the front door. All of the Amado shutters were closed, but after Sergeant Kimura showed me into the famous tatami room, there were already 4 men assembled sitting around a charcoal brazier, quietly smoking. Before were Kosuke, Inspector Isokawa, Jin Sokubo, And finally, the sole representative of the family, Ryuji Ichiyanagi. Seeing how pale and nervous everyone looked, I couldn't help sensing we had arrived at the final scene of this drama. Seeing me approach, Kindaichi-san quickly disposed of his cigarette, but in the brazier. Well then, we're all assembled. It's time to begin the experiment. He sprang to his feet. Now, as the original crime took place around 4 in the morning, technically, we're rather early for the beginning of the experiment. But I don't want to keep everyone waiting around, so let's get things underway. The early start does mean that we will be several artificial aspects to our reenactment. This is unavoidable, but I apologize in advance. He put two fingers into his mouth and whistled. Immediately there was the sound of footsteps. Someone outside running from the east to the west end of the annex house. We were all startled. Keiichi smiled. What the matter? I just entered Kimura. I asked him to take care of the artificial aspect I just mentioned. Keiichi-san went over to the Byobo folding screen that had been placed in front of the Takonoma alcove and moved it inside. Everyone murmured in surprise. Behind it stood a life-size straw doll. I got a local farmhand, Genshichi, to make it for me. To be accurate, there were two people in the room on the night of the murder, but for the purpose of the experiment, just one will do otherwise. I'd like you all to check that the room is in the exact same state as it was that night. The amount that the west side shoji sliding door was open, for example, and this screen in the right position. The bodies were found on the inside. Is that right? Inspector Isokawa helped. Kindaichi-san moved the folding screen over to where it had stood the night of the murders. Suddenly, he made a sign as if to shush us. At first, I didn't understand why, but then as it felt quiet to the room, I couldn't make out the sound of water wheel turning. It had only just started up, and its steady creaking created a distinct background noise. We looked at each other. Sergeant Kimura has opened the water channel for us. As you probably know already, the water wheel doesn't turn constantly. The water channel is normally blocked off. When it's needed, they open the channel and the flowing of the water causes the water wheel to turn. But recently, Kichi, who's in charge of holding the rice, is too busy with the farm work in the daytime, so he comes around 4 in the morning to start up the mill. In other words, every morning at 4 a.m. the water wheel begins turning. Hidechi-san threw out all the information at high speed, as he darted out in the Engawa corridor and returned right away carrying an unsheathed katana sword in one hand, and with the other putting two lengths of some kind of cord which seemed to be attached somewhere out of view behind him. This katana is the one that was hidden in the closet behind the Takoma alcove, and this length of cord, see, it's a koto string. He pulled out what had first looked to be two lengths of string from the Engawa over the top of the folding screen and into the main part of the room. But now, they looked again, there weren't two strings at all, but one single loop. Kindaichi took the end of the loop and slipped it over the hilt of the sword, wrapping around a couple of extra times and tightening it just under the guard. Inspector, would you man the doll? Inspector Sokawa brought the doll over to Kindaichi, who was now standing just in front of the folding screen. We all watched spellbound, as with the hilt of the sword still in his right hand, Kindaichi took the doll in his left. At the start of the experiment, the loop of the koto string had been slack, hanging loosely over the top of the screen, but now we saw that it was being pulled away from us, as if someone were standing behind the screen, tugging it steadily towards them. His eyes suddenly winded. Oh, the water wheel! And that moment, the koto string snapped tight. The guard on the sword was already up the level of the top of the screen. Instantly, Kindaichi-san pushed the straw doll against the sword, plunging the tip of the doll's breast. Ah! Sukawa, Ginso, Ryuchi-san all sat there, their fists clenched, as if they watched a grim reenactment. At first moment, Kindaichi-san let go of the sword and the straw door. The letter fell to the floor, and for a moment the sword remained suspended at the top of the screen, before ducking behind it. At the moment, the hilt of the sword clattered against the rain shutter behind. We all ran into the west side of the Engawa, The double koto string was hanging towards the Ranma transom. With each turn of the water wheel, it was being steadily pulled out of through the gap between the decorated tree trunk and the door in lintel. So it was being pulled towards upwards by the string, and for a few moments its guards began stuck in the corner of the transom. After a few more tugs on the string, the guard finally slipped through the gap, and the blade followed, and at the same instant something fell from the transom with a soft thud. Hidechi-san stood up and showed Ginso. Holy shit, that's actually smarter than I expected. Look at this hand towel, like the one you found lying on Dengawa when you broke the knife. It was dropped over part of the transom to protect him from the damage of the sword. Hideichi opened the rain shutters and we all rushed into the garden, not a single of us caring that we were barefoot outdoors in the winter. The moon had just risen to the garden, was not terribly dark. The sword was there in front of us, dangling loosely in the air. The string wrapped around the guard, now headed in two different directions. The line to the left, running through the top of the stone lantern, and heading towards the northwest. The other line running back toward the roof of the next house. Hideichi-san turned a flashlight in the direction, listening to the cry of the inspector. The Koto Bridge! Right at the corner of the protrusion lavatory roof, someone had attached a Koto Bridge as a support to the Koto string. As the water wheel turned, the string was being reeled in, until eventually the length of the string between the Koto Bridge and the roof, the stone lantern grew taut, and the sword that hung right in the middle. There's the sword, the power of the water wheel, and the two support of the lantern, and the Koto Bridge. The weakness of the 3 points is bound to give. A grating sound came from the direction of the water wheel, and the tension of the Koto string kept increasing until the Koto Bridge flew from the perch of the roof. The string dropped loose. Inspector, try to find that bridge. I think it's probably fell in the pile of leaves. Inspector found it right away next to the leaf pile. All this while, the loosened string was tightened again. This time Hideichi-san raised his flashlight and illuminated the trunk of the camphor tree. The sickle. True enough, the shade of the leaves was the sickle, driven in the trunk of the tree. The Koto string ran through the space between its freshly shaped blade. The tree trunk. Hideichi-san shone his flashlight in the space between the camphor tree. What's the string in the far side? He said. The string ran over the blade of the sickle, continuing in the northwest direction. As the string on it increased, several of the bamboo trees that hung over the edge of the cliff. Beyond their being bent lower and lower, eventually there was one straight, taunting line of string between the sickle and the top left stone lantern. The sword was still hanging there, in between, but now it was much closer to the lantern than before. This time, we're comparing not only the power of the water wheel with the stability of the stone lantern and the sickle, we are adding one more element, the strength of the string. Of those four, which do you think is the weakest? Guess the string? The bridge flew... no, sorry. And then it happened. As if in response to the bamboo tree suddenly sprang back on the string vibration with a pinging sound, the part of the string that we ran through the camphor tree was instantly severed by the sickle. A loud twang twang echoed through the air. The sword was tossed upwards, swung up for a few moments, and thrust itself in the ground. At the foot of the stone lantern. How about that, uncle? Isn't that just about the same spot you found the sword stuck in the ground that night? But no one could reply. All that could be heard in the darkness was a rough, heavy breathing. All eyes were on the sword, which was still vibrating on the ground. And then, Drew will take this opportunity. 1 second. Oh, nice. Anyways, how about that, uncle? This is right then, shall we take an opportunity to go and check where the string ended up? We looked up as if we had just only realized Hideichi was speaking to us. Then, one by one, we filed past the sword in the ground and headed deep in the garden away from the annex house. We followed the two ends of the severed string. Both were being dragged from the branch to branch and moving away steadily further into the distance. Eventually, both ends of the string ended up at a large pine tree with a support branch and disappeared within one of the bamboo supports. I think this is as far as we need to go. After this, the string passes through the hollow bamboo, this tied around the axle of the water wheel beyond. At this point, where it meets the wheel, it's concealed by a large, thick rope, so that nobody would have noticed there was a cut string there. Ginso let out a loud sigh. The inspector clicked his tongue and swore. Then we all returned to the rain-shattered house. But right as we got there, Yuji-san stopped dead and looked up. But the cutter bridge, he mumbled. What's the point of it? That was that to make sure the sword wasn't dragged along the ground. Take a look. There's slightly too much distance between the camphor tree and the transom, so the perpetrator conducted something that will hold the long and prevent the sword from leaving the tracks on the snow. The person who constructed this whole device really didn't want that to happen. It wasn't only the cutter bridge, the beautiful folding screen, the bamboo crutch, they were all cleverly used to support the string so that there will be no traces left on the tatami matting on the ground. The screen, the sickle, the stone lantern, the bamboo, they were all things that were on hand. All things that couldn't be out of place in the crime scene. It really offers a glimpse of the brilliance of the designer, don't you think? The only unnatural element was the cutter bridge, but instead its use helped to make the whole case seem more mysterious. Clearly not a person of a mediocre creed. That was the end of the experiment. We returned to the 8 tatami floor. But in the light, we saw Kindaichi's face was the only one that wasn't completely rain of color. Well, that was interesting. So basically, it was a complete mechanism using the tatami, using not the tatami, the sword, a koto string, the koto bridge, the camphor tree, the stone lantern, to make sure the sword went flying without touching anything. And the water wheel. I suppose that we were told that the water wheel was important. This is kind of, I can't believe someone would think of something like this. Okay, the tragedy of the Honjin. So, for a while we sat at the brazier silence, till finally Ginzo-san mastered some kind of response. His dismal tone reminded me of the dull thud of a pebble dropped into an empty well. And so, repeated Kindaichi-san. He alone was still smiling. Spectre leaned forward. Does it mean that Kenzo-san committed suicide? That's correct. He killed Katsuko and then killed himself. Ginzo-san's voice was filled with pain. Ginzo-san hugged his head. Yes, that's what happened, said Kindaichi. That's why I had Dr. F join us. Doctor, you are the first person to examine the two bodies. Tell me about Kenzo's wound, the position of his body. Was it all consistent with the experiment we just watched? If what you are asking is possible that he inflicted the wounds in several places on his own body before stabbing himself in the heart? I replied, I said that if he set up this kind of device you have just seen, then yes, it's perfectly possible. But there are no inconsistencies. No, I don't think so. But the problem is, why? He's right, Kindaichi-san, said Inspector Isokawa. The question is, why would Kenzo commit such a heinous act to kill your bride and yourself on your wedding night? It's unthinkable. Why the hell did he do that? Spectre, I think you might know why from our talk in the morning with Shizuko Shiraki. I believe the fact that Katsuko wasn't a virgin might have had a direct bearing on this case. Spectre glowed at Kindaichi-san. But something so trivial, because a woman isn't a virgin, if that was such a problem, then why would he even broke the engagement? So you're saying he wouldn't have minded having been the laughingstock among his relatives? Well, you're right. An ordinary person could have probably have endured such treatment, but Kenzo couldn't. And what was the cause of his terrible tragedy? Hideichi-san paused for a moment. Spectre, he added, speaking very lowly. The trick is, I just demonstrated for you. It was nothing. Most of the time you learn how a trick is done and say, oh, it's a little disappointed, a mere child's play. The true horror of it, this case, isn't the way it was done, but why? It was done in order to understand that it's necessary first to understand the man that Kenzo was, his personality, and most importantly, the atmosphere of the Jiyanagi family in which he was raised. He turned to look at Ryuji-san. We have Ryuji with us, the person who probably knew Kenzo the best. I'm sure that he was. Correct me if anything I tell you is wrong. Last night I read all of Kenzo's diaries. What interested me more than its content was the way he handled them. Generally, a diary is something that you open at least once every day, 365 times a year. Doesn't matter how meticulous someone may be, the binding is going to come a bit loose, and the corners of the pages get a little bent. There may be smudges, or even here and there an ink blot, or a fingerprint, but Kenzo diaries have none of this. They're immaculate. They look as if they just arrived from the bookshop, freshly bound. But if you think perhaps it was because he was neglected to write in his diaries, you'd be wrong. On the contrary, he was scrupulous about his writing. And even in his handwriting, every character, every pen stroke was unwavering, finely drawn. Looking at his calligraphy, it's so painstakingly perfect it leaves me short of breath. This alone gives me an image of Kenzo as sensitive, fastidious. I asked the maid Kyo about it. There's one example she gave me. She told me how one time a visitor came to the house in winter and she set up a brazier. The visitor happened to raise the brazier slightly. After he left, Kenzo couldn't settle until the spot had been disinfected with alcohol. I would characterize this as an abnormal preoccupation with cleanliness. I'd go so far as to say Kenzo couldn't help feeling that all human beings other than himself were dirty, impure. There's one other personality trait that becomes clear from reading these diaries. He experienced intense emotional highs and lows. In other words, he constantly went from extreme to extreme. His notions of love and hate were far from normal. With Kenzo, everything was exaggerated. There are no words to express how severe his case was. I realized this about him when I saw how casually he used the phrase, like my mortal enemy. The next thing that was unusual about the man was that he had a very strict sense of justice. In normal circumstances, this might be considered a normal virtue, but in Kenzo's case, I think it would be considered one of his defects. It was merciless. It was allowed for no flexibility whatsoever. He was hard on himself for any dishonesty or deceit, but he was also too strict with others. And then he had to grapple with the extra problem that by birth he was required to be a landowner with power over a whole community. It was at a complete odds with his sense of justice, and his deep dislike of feudal ideology and practices. But the irony was that he, at the same time, as abhorring the system he could sometimes be, the most haughtily aristocratic of all the Hichiganais. It was the result being once the powerful head of a clan, a descendant of the Honjin, the large-scale landowner. When someone failed to show him respect, he was incredibly offended. In other words, Kenzo was a creature of full inconsistencies. Oh, now I get it. Wow. Ryuji-san had sat silently through the Kindaichi-san's speech, staring down at the floor. The absence of any process from him seemed to confirm that each one of the points met, as his doctor had known Kenzo quite well, and felt Kindaichi-san was painting an accurate portrait of the man. Kindaichi took up the story once more. A person such as this was one had no choice but to be lonely. He couldn't trust anyone besides himself. Indeed, it would be fair to say that he considered everyone an enemy, and this attitude was even more pronounced when it came to his nearest relatives. The close relatives with Kenzo had regular daily contact with were first of all his mother, then his cousin Ryosuke, his younger brother Saburo, and finally his younger sister Suzuko. The latter two are barely more than children, so we can assume that the people he had the most problem with were his mother and his cousin, particularly Ryosuke. This Ryosuke-san is another very interesting character. At first sight, he appears to be the exact opposite of Kenzo, personality-wise. On the surface, he's a meek, light-hearted, almost flippant, an easy man to get along with. But if you dig a little deeper, you find he's not so different from Kenzo at all. He has quite a temper, all there in the diaries. How much trouble was caused by Kenzo by both Ryosuke and Itoku-san. How much they got into his nerves. The only reason that this all never came to head was because Kenzo prided himself on the self-control he learned through his superior education. Ryosuke knew this, and with feigned innocence, would deliberately do things to rub Kenzo up the wrong way. And then into the situation came the issue of Katsuko. I don't need to remind anyone how much resistance there was on Kenzo and Katsuko's engagement. That's the first them to accept it. And the marriage finally happened. However, shortly before the wedding, Katsuko confessed Kenzo that she wasn't a virgin, and that he had once had a lover, but it wasn't at all. She admitted that she had run into him recently, albeit accidentally. How did Kenzo react to this news? Kindaichi broke off there. Nobody offered a response. He also there looking grim. I think Kenzo was originally attracted by the Katsuko's intelligence, her bright character, and there was also calm within the brightness. Something efficient and businesslike in her nature. They were all a huge factions in the appeal, but I believe the aspect that held the greatest charm was she appeared extremely virtuous. Purity was something that was the utmost important to Kenzo. And then, right before his wedding, he discovered that she was laying with another man. He believed that another man's blood runs inside her body. I told you earlier the story of how Kenzo had used the alcohol to disinfect the heater that guest hand accidentally touched. And now this. How can you say it? Another man, well, to Kenzo all other people were dirty. A woman he held in his heart, the same woman he planned to hold in his arm, into his bed. For a man like Kenzo, just thinking about it would make his flesh crawl. He would have break off the engagement, but unfortunately Kenzo couldn't do that. To him, to back down and break the engagement in front of all the relatives that he had power over would be akin to removing his helmet and surrendering to the enemy. Could he have taken Katsuko as his wife in name only and deceive the eyes of the family? There was a reason why he couldn't do that either. It was because just a few days before the wedding, Katsuko had met this man called Taya, the apartment store in Osaka. We have a little idea of what this man Taya is, and of course Kenzo had none. But Taya may as well have been the type to come and squeeze Kenzo from money to keep quiet about the affair. There was no guarantee at all that this wouldn't happen. For argument's sake, if he made Katsuko his wife, in name only, glossing over the truth, imagine if Taya had turned up, how shameful it would be for Kenzo. Just picture this, Kenzo decided to couldn't take the risk. Still, this wasn't just a way to solve a practical problem. I believe the origin of the motive lay much deeper, deep in Kenzo's psyche. He must have felt a furious hatred towards Katsuko for putting him in the hopeless position. This woman, who within her defiled body was attempting to become his wife, we must have driven him to indescribable fury. But given Kenzo's personality, he would have avoided showing any part of this hatred and anger to Katsuko. Instead, the kind of outbursts of emotion that both his father and his uncle had displayed were buried deep in Kenzo's heart, and now that he's persistently, eventually bursting out in the form of a sinister plan. The motive for this murder-suicide plan is incomprehensible to any normal person, but to a character of Kenzo and in the eyes of such a family proud of the descent of a Honjin, it becomes perfectly natural and reasonable. No, I'd go so far as to say that it was an unavoidable murder. Kenzo had to murder Katsuko. There was no other way. For appearance's sake, he had to go through with the wedding ceremony, even that he had insisted on it so forcefully. But he had absolutely no intention for them or ever to live as a married couple. Thus, there was no other possible moment for the killing than the point at which they were consummating their marriage. So it was a double suicide. A double suicide? No, it wasn't a regular murder, fueled by malice, hatred, and fury at Katsuko for coming and trapped him in the impossible situation. and he certainly succeeded in his plan to kill Katsuko. But the clue was very clear. He knew that however ingenious his murder plan, he was the only reason this all never came to head, because he surprised himself in self-control. He learned with his superior education. Yosuke knew that uh, Yosuke knew this, and with a feigning innocence, would deliberately do things like rubbing Kenzo the wrong way. And then, into a situation that came the issue of Katsuko. I don't need to remind anyone here of how much resistance there was to Kenzo and Katsuko's engagement. Kenzo forced them to accept it, and the marriage finally happened. However, shortly before the wedding, Katsuko confessed to Kenzo that she wasn't a virgin. Oh wait, sorry. Blah 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 blah. That's why I doesn't make sense. Sorry, Kenzo had used alcohol to his how? It's completely this woman who had heard no, he was bound to get found and in the end. Or even if he wasn't found out, a man with such a conscience and a strict sense of justice wouldn't be able to live with the knowledge that he was a murderer. Kenzo knew himself well. So before the police could work it out, before his crime could be registered on the conscience, he killed himself believing it was the right thing to do. In other words, this case is the opposite of the usual murder of a detective story. In the normal order of things, first things, there's a murder, second the police and the private detectives do their job, and then the third, the murder commits the suicide upon being caught. This is the regular sequence of events. In our case, steps 2 and 3 were reversed. The murderer already killed himself, but that doesn't mean that we should take this case any more lightly as a result. From the start, the killer wanted to convince us that Katsuko's death wasn't his fault. He even tried to hide the fact of his own suicide. He to say it, but this is a very dirty trick. Not wanting to look like a suicide, was that from not wanting to admit defeat to his relatives? Not to not having his relatives and Ryosuke in particular ridicule him? Is that what he was thinking? Right, right. The whole puzzle, all of the mysteries in this case came from that one thing, lineage. The tragedy of the Honjin. There's two more chapters, though, which make it weird because the thing should be over now. Two more chapters of this. Let's see. The rehearsal. Nobody spoke for a long while. There was only a single brazier in the whole of the annex house. The cold was slowly seeping in through our bones. But nobody wanted to leave, and thereby put an end to the conversation. The inspector was idly drawing kanji characters in the ashes, then erasing them. Writing, erasing. Finally he looked up. Well, that explains more or less why all this happened, but how exactly did it happen? Tell us, tell us that. Right away, Kenichi Treadman grinned and head scratch were back. Okay then, how about this? In this murder case, the perpetrator is already dead, so we can't hear his confession, I suppose. I suppose we are going to have to use our imagination. Luckily, we have assembled here a whole cast of people connected to the case. Let's go back to the beginning. Kenichi-san pulled a small notebook from his pocket and opened it on his lap. The very first thing that struck me about this case was how much about it resembled a mystery novel. Starting, most obviously, with the locked room murder case. Then the instruction of the three-finger man character. The sound of the koto, the photograph in the album, and the burned fragment in the diaries. All these things were straight out of the pages of a detective novel. There were just one of the two of these elements that perhaps would have believed them to have been no more than a coincidence. With all these various elements carefully included, I couldn't help but believe it was part of the deliberate plan. That was when I came across Sabro's mystery novels. Spectre, do you remember how thrilled I was to discover the collection? Power nods, yes. The trick it was the center of the case, making the serial look like a murder, comes up quite often in detective fiction. The most famous example would be the feature in the Sherlock Holmes story, The Problem of Thorbridge. In order to make her suicide look like a murder, it was important for the perpetrator to get the weapon as far away from the body as possible. The weapon in this story was a revolver, to which she attached one end of a piece of string, then tied the other end to a heavy rock. The woman stood on top of Thor Bridge and shot herself in the head with the gun. The moment her hand loosed the grip of the revolver, the weight of the rock pulled it down the bottom of the river below. I believe Kensu came up with this plan after reading that story. Makes sense. The weight of the rope pulled down the revolver down the river below. I believe the evidence is that the book was there among Severus' collection, but unlike the rest of the books, some of the verses have been marked. I see. But then, what was Severus' role in this whole thing? Ryo-san looked anxious, but Kenichi grinned and scratched his head. Wait a minute. I'm sure you're eager to know what part Saburo played, but if you don't mind, I'll come out to a little later. Suffice to say, that was Kenzo first began to hatch the plan, Saburo knew absolutely nothing about it. Given Kenzo's personality, there seemed little chance that he would have asked anyone else for help with such a serious undertaking, so keep this in mind as we follow how the plan developed. And now let's take a look at the beginning. Take a look at the case once again, starting from the beginning at the building, piece by piece. Hideji-san looked at his notebook. Act 1. Act 1 of this play took place in the 23rd of November. In other words, 2 days before the wedding. Early in the evening, this is when the mysterious three-finger man turned up the Kawa's tavern, opposite of the government office. That's the moment that the plan went into operation. The inspector suddenly leaned forward. Really? But what the relation does the three-finger man have to the Ichiyanagi family? Inspector, the man had nothing whatsoever to do with the Ichiyanagis. He was no more other than a traveler passing through. But Kosan, he's a front. He asked the Kami-san the way to the Ichiyanagi residence. Yes, he did. But uncle, what he really wanted to know was the way to H Village, Inspector. Recall what happened to the morning in the cave when I asked the tobacconist? Inspector Isokawa's expression revealed that he just figured out Kindaichi-san. Everyone agrees that the man appears to have come from far away. He most likely got off the train to an end station. There, he asked for direction to H Village, so how do people usually reply when asked to the question? H is a good 5 miles from the station. It's much too difficult to give all the direction in one go, so people start by giving some landmarks along the route. You know, when you go to so and so and ask again, it's perfectly normal. So the man reached to K-Town, they just asked again. I carried out my own little experiment this morning. The tobacconist told me the way, explaining it something like this. If you follow this road, you will end up in front of the government office. In O. When you get there, ask the Ichiyanagi place. It's a huge mansion. You can't miss it. If you take the road that passes in front of the Ichiyanagi place, it will take you over the hill into the H. The three-finger man was given some kind of directions, and so when he got to the old government office, he asked to Kami-san at the tavern opposite direction to the Ichiyanagi residence. The Inspector Isokawa, Ginso, and Ryushi-san all gave the same version of a groan. It was a perfectly plausible explanation. The three-finger man, with whom everyone had been obsessed, turned to be only the scantest of connection to the Ichiyanagi family. I'm afraid it's true, continued Kindaichi-san. Until that moment, he had nothing to do with the Ichiyanagi at all, but shortly after asking this direction, he was mixed up in the case. Or to be more precise, he got mixed up in Kesu's plan. Next, he left the tavern and walked up to the Ichiyanagi home. As everyone said, it was a huge, impressive mansion. He had heard that the Kami-san and her customer talk about the head of the house getting married soon. So his interest was piqued, and he peeped through the gate. It was just normal human behavior, natural curiosity. If he was caught picking by the locals, covered his embarrassment, he asked again a way to the H village. It's all totally normal behavior. So asking his way to the H right then was to cover his embarrassment, but at the same time, he simply said that he was already in his mind. He always intended to go to H. By the way, have you all noticed? From here, the road slopes sharply uphill. Everyone who saw him agrees that the three-finger man was weak and emaciated. Before climbing the hill, he needed to take a break. But aware that the sight of him made people suspicious, he searched for somewhere out of sight. He clambered up the thick bamboo on the cliff, that had the Ichiyanagi home. That makes perfect sense too. Then he ended up murdered by Kenzo, said the inspector. That was my cue. I coughed politely to get Hideichi's attention. He smiled to me. Not quite. I'd like to call on Dr. F to explain that part. In fact, that's why I invited him to join us this evening. Doctor, could you give us a result of the autopsy? I nodded, understanding finally why he had asked me not to release the results until now. The young man was at first sight quite humble and modest, but in reality he enjoyed putting on a show. He wanted the information made public at the most dramatic moment possible. I will explain the result of the autopsy as simple as I can. The man was not murdered. He died of natural causes. I can ascertain exactly cause until there is a proper post-mortem, but in my opinion his heart most likely failed due to extreme fatigue and exhaustion. For the injury in the chest area, it was made at least 24 hours after the time of death. There were cries of surprise all around. Ryuji-san's eyes lit up and he leaned forward in excitement. So you're saying that my brother didn't kill this man? That's right, he didn't. I always thought he hadn't. First of all, Kenzo was obsessed with suicide plan and this three-finger man was not an original part of it. And second, he couldn't have committed the injustice of murder a completely innocent bystander. But the injury that was on his chest. Well, Inspector, those are the results of Kenzo's practice run. Oh, just like I did earlier this evening, Kenzo also performed an experiment. He devised the plan, but he had no idea whether it would work or not. Even if it did work, how much time he would need to complete it. So he practiced it. He used the corpse as his dry run. Oh. Uncle, you mentioned that one night before the murder, Suzuko said she heard the sound of the cutter string being plucked. That was Kenzo rehearsing. We exchanged looks. Ryuji-san had turned pale again. It wasn't news of another murder. It was just a dreadful, or rather, it was a more dreadful. It was a downright macabre shivers ran up and down my spine. To get back to the story of the three-finger man, after he climbed up the cliff behind the annex house, it wasn't long before he breathed his last. It was Kenzo who found him that was the night of the 23rd morning on the 24th, and Kenzo probably couldn't believe his luck. Here was a perfect guinea pig for his experiment. He simply carried the body down the annex house and hid it away. As you may have guessed, he used the closet behind the tokonoma for a hiding place. That explains why the man's fingerprints were in there. And that concludes the events of the night of the 23rd. Then the next day on the 24th, the day before the wedding, you may recall that there was a heated exchange in the sitting room. On the main house of that day, Kenzo and his mother quarreled about the koto in the middle of the night. Roscoe turned up with the coffin that he made for the cat, and Sarah arrived back from the barber shop in the village. Sarah revealed that the three-finger man had been asking the way to the Ichianai house. When he heard about the man having 3 fingers, Kosuke was reminded of the koto. For Suzuko, it was very reasonable association she pretended to play. This all had a crucial connection to the case. What it did was give Kenzo an important idea. We looked confused. Kenzo had already laid down the details of the plan, but he still hadn't worked out what kind of string to use. It had to be thin yet strong. He did a great length of it. While he was still puzzled over the question, Suzuko mimed a three-finger man playing the koto. Now I want you to remember that at this point in the time, the three-finger man was already dead, stashed in the closet in the next house. Kenzo must have been truly surprised when the very man he was planning to use in his practice run suddenly became the topic of conversation in his family's sitting room. At this time, watching Suzuko's hand, he had a flash of inspiration. The three-finger man, a koto, right there came to him. Kenzo thought of using a length of koto string. It's ironic that such an innocent, simple-minded young girl, through such a harmless gesture, could have had such a major influence on a murder. It's really quite awful, but it's true. Kenzo went straight to the storehouse and found a length of koto string in his house. There were so many causes there that there's a surplus of strings there, spare strings. Someone would notice if someone of it went missing. While Kenzo was in the storehouse looking for the string, the koto bridge on the lovebird caught his eye. I don't believe Kenzo was originally going to use the koto bridge to make the vertex point of the lavatory roof. I imagine he planned to use the forked twig or something, but when he saw the arc shape of the koto bridges, he realized that it was, of course, the perfect device to support the string. He took one, and that is how the murder case ended up having such a deep connection to the musical instrument. The Inspector murmured his acknowledgement, and then he rehearsed the trick that night. He did, and there were two results that he hadn't expected. First was that the string rubbed against a lot of branches in the bamboo thicket and made a pinging noise. Rather that he didn't cut down if he didn't cut down some of the bamboo, the same thing would happen the following evening. However, Kenzo didn't feel like going out and cutting down trees, so he decided to let a sound be produced again. But this time, to camouflage it, so between murder Katsuko and killing himself, he plucked wildly the koto in the room. The other members of the Ichianagi household were awakened by the sound and remained oblivious to the other camouflage sound of the string running through the koto string. Huh. And what was the second unexpected result of the experiment? That Saburo discovered it. Well, that's my hypothesis. That at some point Saburo got in the plan. This came as a surprise to everyone. Ryushi-san's face was shaken. Yeah, I figured out that kinda happened. My belief is that Saburo realized that it was a suicide, and he was a shitheel. He's a shit person. So he didn't just try to stop his friend from killing himself. No, he wanted his brother. He did the thing that any normal what's his name? I forgot his name. That any normal asshole would do. He would say, "You should kill yourself and try to get the money." And he didn't want someone to discover that that was a suicide, because he wouldn't get the money out of it if it was a suicide. He needed the guy to have suicided. He needed the guy to have killed himself. So that was part of his plan. You needed another person to do it, and that's why it's more complex. And so, if you guess rightly, what effect did Saburo's discovery of the pyramid have? Well, we don't know for sure until we ask Saburo himself. However, I think the nature of the trick demonstrates that he might have been involved. There was a lot of games played. I would go so far as to claim that Kenzo would have been satisfied to make it look like a double murder. But it hadn't occurred to him to try to frame someone of the crime. Here, the aficionado detective novel became involved. Saburo decided that a murder without a murderer didn't cut it, and quickly devised a fake one. The deceased three-finger man was a perfect scapegoat. Neither Kenzo nor Saburo had any idea who this man was, nor why he'd been asking directions to the Ichiranagi house, but he was sitting looking, and he had, after all, been asking about their home. Additionally, Saburo had guessed that the man's three-finger handprint had probably been left on the glass at the Kawa Tavern. And this awoke the creativity urge. Any fan of mystery novel could have come with the idea of planting fingerprints. Okay, Brian, how are you doing? But that wasn't enough for Saburo. The photograph in the album, the fragments of dirty pages, all were created in the impression of some kind of bad blood between Kenzo and the three-finger man. These are tricks straight out the mind of a crime novel enthusiast. The murder-suicide plan was created from a melding of a brilliant scientific mind of Kenzo and the widely read Saburo, which what made it such a complex case to figure it out in conclusion. The case was a collaborative project between these two. So why was the photo album tearing the album? Spectre, you cut the photo out along the cardboard page, right? If you had tried to remove it from the page, we would have spotted the trick right away. Look, Hidaichi picked up the photo which he already removed from the cardboard backing. On the back of the photograph, you see traces of where it was peeled away from the previous location. Also, once I removed the backing, it became clear that a different picture used to be attached to the page of the album. Saru had carefully removed the original photo from its spot in the album, replaced it with this one. In other words, Kenzo's mortal enemy, whom he swore to hate all his life, existed, but it wasn't the man in the photo. Where did Saru get hold of the photograph? The three-finger man was carrying it, of course. But that what doesn't make sense, Ryushi-san. People don't usually go around carrying their own photograph. That's true. Just as you say normally, but there are people in the lines of work always having their own pictures on them. Bus and taxi drivers, for example. Spectre Isokawa suddenly cried. That's right. You've been thinking the same thing. That's I have seen this photo like this one all over. It's a type of photo that drivers want have on their licenses. Oh, this is exactly. I was thinking something like that when it happened. Like, this kind of looks like the photos looks like some entrance exam photo or something like that. So it must be something like a license or stuff, some kind. And knowing that, it explained the terrible gash on the man's face and his two missing fingers. Incidentally, I have discovered it. Wait, sorry. Incidentally, I have discovered who he was. The name is Yoshiki Shimizu. He was born in Shitsuki-gun and moved to Tokyo when he was a young boy. Later, he took up the work as a taxi driver. Fairly recently, his car was involved in a serious accident. That was how he got his injuries. Obviously, he could no longer work as a driver and wanted to spend his time convalescing, and he wrote a letter to his son in H Village, asking to stay with her for a while. He wrote back to say yes, but hadn't heard anything from him since. He assumed he was on his way and had been expecting him to arrive yesterday or today. That's what I heard from Sergeant Kimura after I sent him to make some door-to-door inquiries in H Village. According to his aunt, Yoshi Shimusu had never been to this part of the country before, and when the Sergeant Kimura showed her these photos, she said that she hasn't seen him since he was a young boy, so she couldn't say for sure it was him or not. But then she added that the man in the photo looked a lot like her brother, Yoshi's father. So it was probably him after all. To sum it up, the three-finger man was Kiyoshi Shimizu, a professional taxi driver, who on his way to his son's home in H Village suffered an unhappy end to his life in a cliff behind the house. And then his death was used by my brother. Chris's son looked sorrowful, but the inspector paid him no heed. And what about the burnt patient from the diaries? How do you explain those? That was another of Subaru's tricks, said Kindaichi with a chuckle. For years on end, Kenzo had kept scrupulous records of everything that he's done. There was bound to be something among his many experiences worth using. Several pulled out bits from several places and made it kind of like a montage. Here, the outline of the plot. Take a look. From between the pages of his notebook, Kindaichi processed the 5 fragments of the burnt paper. Starting from the fragment level number 1. On my way to the beach, I went by the usual place. Ofayu-san was playing the koto again. Lately, I found the sound of the koto melancholy. And number 3. Ofayu-san funeral, desolate morning morning day. Listening again here on the island. The funeral was. Did we follow the number 5? Before I left the island, I paid one more visit to Ofayu's grave. I took some wild chrysanthemum, and as I was praying, I thought I could hear the sound of koto. Abruptly, the condition of the paper and the color of the ink, and as they all flew to the same woman of Ofayu-san, it cleared that these 3 sections were all written at the same time. However, number 2, the dog, the brute, I really despise him. I will despise this man for the rest of my life. Number 4, I think of challenging a duel. This is inexpressible fury. When I think of the lonely death that she met, who tore him limb to limb, I consider him my mortal enemy, and I hate him, hate him. This section were written with a different pen, in a slightly different shade of ink. I believe the section 3 and 5 were written by Kenzo during his travels, and none of them with a fountain pen. Section 2 and 4 were written in a completely different time, for the penmanship. And the other features, I'm convinced that they were written a while before the other 3. Probably from when Kenzo was still working at the university. Kristen-san, do you have any memory of that time? Kristen-san looked up suddenly. It was clear that he had remembered something, but just as quickly, he looked down again, unable to call anyone's gaze. After some hesitation, he began to tell a story. The idea was a very strange thing. While he was working at the university, there was some kind of incident, and afterward, my brother felt extremely resentful toward one of his colleagues. In fact, he hated him. This man used to be this close friend of his, but he fell over the daughter of a teacher that they were both knew well. This was completely betrayed by his friend, double cross, or at least that's what he believed, resulting in my brother being left in a shameful position. He was forced to leave his post in the university. The young woman fell sick, presumably as a result of this incident, and eventually died. I don't know much of this is true, but I know the fact that the case that Kenzo workers believe the former friend really fought. My brother loathed this man to the very core. Immediately, I thought of that person, but but closed at this island, so I presume it couldn't be him. This man whose name immediately recognized this day. This man is a famous scholar. I couldn't believe that this man like that would have. Anyways, that's why I didn't say anything until now. Let's see. And did you ever meet this man? Never. I started to see photos in paper, but only in recent years. Honestly, I couldn't tell whether the photo you showed us from the was him in the younger years or not. That's completely understandable. Sabaru was quite ingenious in the way he combined the incident with the later episode of Kenso's time in the island. Then by working the photo of the Three-Finger Man, he created a clever piece of fiction for us to quite a shock. Indeed, laughed. He even chose the piece from the island because he featured a Koto. Kenzo was a kind of person who never showed his diary to another person, but he was no match for Saburo. He would often amused himself by poking his nose into his private affairs. He clearly had a good brain, being able to recall immediately what Kenzo had written about and when, where to find it, and how to rearrange it. Therefore, I believe that from the moment Saburo joined the planning, it was his mind that devised the scheme. Kenzo became no more than a puppet following orders. Saburo was showing off his vast knowledge of detective fiction, and Kenzo was no match for all that knowledge. I didn't think Kindaichi's theory too outlandish, with the exception of Ryuji-san, who had always seemed to be a fairly normal person. I knew that the Kolishinagi plans were eccentric. And then after the plan was concocted, he cut off the corpse's hand and buried the rest of the body in the charcoal kiln. That was before the sun on the 25th. But somehow, later that evening, right before the wedding ceremony was due to start, the Three-Finger Man made an appearance at the kitchen door. I believe that was actually Kenzo dressed up to look like him. He and Saburo had set up a trick with a photo album, but it was quite a reason to escape notice to the police. That the misdirection wouldn't work if they devised piece of theater, which couldn't fail to capture the attention of the investigators, and was intended to make everyone believe that the Three-Finger Man was still alive on the day of the murder. After leaving the kitchen, and still dressed as the Three-Finger Man's clothing, Kenzo took the path of the wide side of the property, ran alongside the north of the cliff, and then slid down the hillside just behind the annex house. He slid into the house where he changed back the usual clothes and waited to Akiko to turn up to the scrap of paper and hand it to him. He tore it into shreds and in front of her, stuck the pen into his pocket and to the sleeve of his kimono, and then left the annex. He made the point of asking Akiko to close all the strange shutters. When Akiko finally got back to the main house, Kenzo was nowhere to be seen. The reason no one could find him was that he returned to the annex house and was making the fake footprints, putting himself taking some of his own blood to leave on the three-finger handprints on the inside of the rain shutter, taking the shoes and the other clothes belonging to the Three-Finger Man and shoving them into the chimney of the charcoal kiln, and then finally pulling the end of the prepared cotton string to the gap of the ransom transom. Ranma transom, no ransom transom, what? Okay. Kindaichi-san, said the inspector in Sokawa, you're saying that the fingerprints were already there from the early evening? They were. There's no other time that he could have been able to make them. That was the first clue I had solving the case. It was the bloody fingerprints. There were other prints in more obvious places, such as the folding screen, but they were made by fingers from the Kotopics. In contrast, the clearer fingerprints were left in more difficult to find locations. I thought that must be something singular about them. This suggested two things to me. The fingerprints in these two locations, the pillar and the rain shutters, were discovered a long time after the others, and I was sure the killer had counted on that. In other words, it would have been disadvantageous to have the killer if the investigator had found them any earlier. It didn't matter that they were found, but that they shouldn't be found quickly. So why? It is that they must have had a different appearance to the other fingerprints, due to how dry they were. If they'd been found too early, the discrepancy between the colors of the prints and the other ones would have been obvious. I concluded that it was better of the killer that they were found as late as possible. The second point was that the two spots were concealed well enough for there to have been fingerprints there during the earlier activity in the annex house, such as the sake cup ceremony. But even before that, I found it strange that the criminal who was cautious enough to put the Kotopics over the fingerprints would also be careless enough to leave the fingerprints at all in the place. So I came to the conclusion that this finger must have been left deliberately, moreover, long before the crime was committed. Huh. The inspector sounded impressed. He let it grin. And now the stage was set. Kenzo took the severed hand to the main building. Now you ask why. Considering Kenzo had gone to the effort of taking the shoes and the clothes of the charcoal killing, hadn't disposed of the hand at the same time. I believe he was following Saburo's instruction. I think Saburo was enjoying himself far too. Oh, thank you for the mana. Far too much. He probably couldn't resist using the hand for some nefarious purpose of his own. So he got Kenzo to leave it in hiding place for him to pick it up later. Of course, Saburo didn't want to keep it to himself. He had to be prepared to in case the house was searched for after the murder. He hit on the idea of getting Kenzo to put it in the cat's coffin that he knew Suzuko had hidden in the room, as he had hoped. Right after the murder, Suzuko took the coffin out and buried it, making it perfect hiding spot. And after that, Kenzo went to the study and dealt with the diaries. Yes, that's right. Saburo had already marked the passages should be used. All Kenzo had to do was tear up the pages and partially burn them, along with the scraps of the letter in the kimono sleeve. However, as we know, he didn't burn the scraps. He didn't get rid of a single piece. Just kept them in a sleeve. There are no doubt that... Oh, thank you again. I need to check what the hell is that. MySpace. Oh shit! Thank you for the elixir. Thank you for passing by. Holy shit, that's a lot. Thank you, Lazy Lion. X Lazy Lion X. Lions. Anyways, let's continue. Da, 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 da. However, as we know, he didn't burn the scraps. He didn't get rid of the single piece of it. He just kept them in his sleeve. There's no doubt that this was someone scrupulous as Kenzo. He must have left those scraps there purposely, so we could find them. Find the letter from his so-called mortal enemy. Then, shortly afterwards, the wedding ceremony began. There were two circumstances of note. The first was the koto was moved to the annex house. Luckily for Kenzo's plan, the major made the suggestion. If no one had brought up the subject, Kenzo surely planned to do so. It was quickly to tell Katsuko that the koto was hers. The second thing of importance was that the Kenzo told Saburo to accompany the great uncle Ihei home. It was probably to give Saburo an alibi for the murder. By the way, I have a question about you, Ryuji-san. Ryuji-san raised an eyebrow. I'm sure the inspector here has already asked you the same question, but I know that you are already here on the evening of the 25th. In the case, why didn't you attend your brother's wedding ceremony? And why the next morning did you pretend you just arrived? Ryuji-san looked pained. First, I have to say that only now do I understand why Kenzo strictly forbade me to come back from Osaka for the wedding. I guess he didn't want me to fall under suspicion, so he was making sure I had an ironclad alibi. Of course, I have no idea of his motives, but the tone of the letter he wrote made me extremely worried, and I felt I had to come. So I left the conference one day early on and came to Cape Town to find out what was going on. I thought it was better not to show my face at the wedding, so I stayed away. But then the next day there was all the commotion, so I met with Saburo and the great uncle Ike and arrived at the house in the morning. Your big brother really loved you, didn't he? I'm fairly sure he wasn't acting out of love. I think it was because I was the only person who really understood him. I get it. Was less afraid of you falling under suspicion for his murder than of you reading his true intention. Yushi-san nodded. That was probably true. That morning, as soon as I heard what happened, I immediately thought my brother had done it. Why he did it, and how he could have done it, those were the things I couldn't fathom. I'd like to thank you. That clears up what you were doing here. Next, the scene of the... Holy shit. Thank you for the sub. I have to wonder what all those noises are because I forgot about setting in the alert thing, but it still appears. Although I guess there's an alert. Anyways, thank you for the subscription. I don't know why, but thank you. Um First, I have to say I only know blah 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 blah. There's a problem. I forgot where I was. Um, Ruby probably loved you. La la la. Probably true. I'd like to thank you. That clears up what you were doing here. Next, the scene of the crime. The second ceremony was just finished, and Kenzo didn't get around telling him. Or perhaps Saru just forgot about it in all the confusions from the discovery murder. Anyways, stay inside of his pocket until today. I believe I have covered all the preparations. Now we have come to the moment of the tragedy. Kindaichi's expression darkened. We all found ourselves holding our breath. It's an atrocious crime, and the fact that it was planned and thought through down to the last detail make it even more terrible. Did Kenzo lie motionlessly in the marriage bed, waiting for the water wheel to start turning? When he heard the sound of it starting up, did he leap to his feet and pretend to his head toward the lavatory, fetching the katana from the closet? Then, after slashing Katsuko to death with the sword, he put 3 koto picks onto his fingers and placed some cords in the koto and rubbed bloody traces on the koto picks onto the folding screen. I admit that the fact that he left those koto pick traces on the screen gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. Not because Kenzo used the picks to conceal his own fingerprints, but because it displays his meticulous nature. He already used the koto strings and the koto bridges. It was fitting that he would use the koto picks too. I feel that that was his reasoning. Next, he pulled off the koto picks at the wash bin, and on his way back took hold of the end of the string that was hanging through the ranma, pulling it with him back to the tatami room. Then he killed himself, in a way that I demonstrated to you earlier. And that was how the mysterious Honjin murder was committed. Everyone stayed silent, lost in their own thoughts. The cold had seeped into his core, and I gave an involuntary shudder. Right away, as if it was a contagion that spread the rest of the assembly guests, began to shiver. That was when Ryojin suddenly spoke up. But what I don't understand is why my brother didn't just leave the rain shutters open. He wouldn't have looked as if the murder had got in and out of the way. Totally, that would have seemed more natural. Today's reaction was dramatic. He went to scratch away in that noticed touch of hair with passion abandon. When he spoke, his stammer was more present than ever. That's the most fascinating part of this case. He rubbed his cup and downed the dregs of his tea. Then he continued in a calmer voice. That's exactly what he was supposed to do. But something unexpected happened. They completely threw off the plan. Circumstances that had never imagined. It snowed. Just imagine he planted a trail of footprints, the same one that had leaned on the foot door, but hidden away from the building through the garden and the west. The idea was to suggest that the killer had escaped the way after the murder, but the trail of footprints was completely buried by the snow. Couldn't he make a new trail? But that was impossible. For one thing, he had already got rid of the three-finger man worn out shoes in the chimney, in the charcoal kiln. Likewise, there's no point in opening the rain shutters now to suggest the killer escaped that way, but then leaving the snow completely untouched outside. There was nothing for it but to turn the crime into a lockroom murder scene. Well, we couldn't know for sure exactly how he reasoned, but I think well, why he left the rain shutters locked. In other words, what we have here was not, after all, a meticulous planned lockroom murder, but a case where the killer was reluctantly forced to create one. In other words, an accidentally locked room murder mystery. No, wait. Well, we can't know for sure how he reasoned, but I think that was why he left the rain shutters locked. In other words, what we have here was not, after all, a meticulously planned lockroom murder, but a case where the killer was reluctantly forced to create one. In other words, an accidental locked room murder mystery. And chapter 18, final chapter. Man, I think this has been the fastest that I have been reading this. And finally, chapter 18, the final chapter. That concludes Dr. F's report. He did make some further notes regarding Saburo's involvement in the case, but I have obtained information from other sources. I will attempt to summarize it myself. When Saburo had recovered from his tetanus infection, Inspector Isokao grilled him about his role in the case. He confessed everything. It was more or less exactly as Koski Kindaichi had predicted. He got mixed up in the plan when he discovered his brother performing his dry run. This is how Saburo told it. I'll never forget the menacing look on my brother's face. That night I noticed there was a light on the next house. I tiptoed up to take a look. My brother had been in the strange mood for days. He'd been in another world, deep in thought about something, and easily started to by the slightest noise. I had been most obvious that afternoon when I got back from the barber's and told everyone about the three-fingered man. So his expression changed. This was fresh in his mind, so when I saw the light on the house, I just had to go and see what was up to. The garden was tightly locked, with the bolt pulled through the inside, so I climbed over the fence to get into the annex grounds. I crept around the west side and spied into him through a small gap between the rain shutters. I imagined my shock when a katana suddenly came through the ranma above my head. I thought I screamed, but in terror of the moment, I couldn't speak. I stood there, dumbstruck. The sword swung in the air, and then a few moments later, it began to make the ping ping twang songs before flying up in the air, landing on the ground by the stone ladder. Right at the moment it landed in the rain shutter, opened, my brother's face appeared. It all came too clear for me to think to hide myself. Kenzo found me standing there like a fool, the expression of fear in his face. I never forget it. He grabbed me by the scruff of my neck and dragged me into the house. When I found the three-fingered man lying dead on the tatami, and with the gory wound in his chest. Even Saburo couldn't help trembling when the ghastly scene. I was convinced my brother had taken to leave of his senses, and that I was about to meet the same fate as the man on the tatami. Kenzo was worked up and held me so tightly that for a while I couldn't even breathe. But I gradually got less agitated, and like a balloon releasing air, he sort of deflated. In fact, I have never seen my brother so dejected. Kenzo was always weak. He always used to brood over things like girls, but like a girl, but he never showed that side of himself in everyday life. He always came across as cold-hearted and haughty. To see him so low, with no pride or honor, frankly, I felt sorry for him, but at the same time, it gave me kind of a thrill. Finally, Kenzo managed to pull himself together and began to tell me about his plan, but only part of it. He was almost in tears when he begged me not to say a word to anybody. The reason I say only part of his plan is that he never mentioned Katsuko-san to me at all. Not that he planned to kill himself, but he didn't want it to look like a suicide. It had to look like a murder. Of course, I was horrified he told him that. He couldn't do that, so he asked me why not. Thorpe replied to the question of Kenzo's was remarkable, somewhat chilling, proof that he was indeed a true fanatic of the detective novel genre. This is what I told Kenzo. When a murder is committed, the prime suspect is the one with the most to gain. That gets Kenzo death will be whoever inherited Jinai family estate. In other words, my elder brother, Ryuji. But as Ryuji was nowhere near at the time, he wouldn't be on the list of suspects. I thought his suspicion would fell on me instead. That's me. Why? Why would anyone suspect you? You hardly benefit from my death. All this property will pass to Ryuji. Answer, that's not quite accurate. If you die, I inherit 50,000 yen in interest money. Yeah, holy shit, I was correct. Yeah. Kenzo's face must have been a picture when Saburo explained this. Sure, he stared at him as if he were seeing some kind of alien movie. Alien monster, I mean. Movies were, well, they were invented. Anyways. I mentally thought, according to Saburo, Kenzo's face broke into ghastly grins. And the Tonche, Saburo, you're a clever one, aren't you? You have quite a hand on your shoulders, right? Then go ahead, tell everyone that it wasn't murder and I killed myself, but if If you do, you won't be able to collect a single gem from the insurance money. You do realize that when it turns out that the deceased has committed suicide, there's no payout in the insurance. Is that what you want? To throw away your chances to get your hands on 50,000 yen? You're not as smart as you thought you are. Older brothers, young brothers alike, every member of the Jianagi house was peculiar in some way, but Saburo was for sure the most freakish of them all. After hearing Kanzo's explanations, he must have found himself in a terrible dilemma, but he came up with a solution favorable to himself. In order to free of suspicion of Kenzo's murder, he made his brother promise to manufacture an alibi for him. When he had extracted his promise, he was in a fine mood, devoting himself to the plan and drawing on his extreme knowledge of detective novels. I believe the reason Saburo was so enthusiastic about helping his brother with his plan was, of course, in order to be sure to get his 50,000 yen, but also because it was the first time in his life that he was able to feel superior to his big brother in any way. He was revealing it. As Kosuke Kindaichi also pointed out, the more Saburo became involved, or the more the plot became similar to that of a detective novel, the more the status of the two brothers switched. Kenzo quite readily followed all of Saburo's commands, every bizarre trick that Saburo came up with. He gave bitter smile and followed his order. It was Saburo's forte. He must have been having a time of his life. The ruse with the three-finger man photo, as well as the stunt with the burned diaries, these were all Saburo's ideas. Needless to say, the ideas of cutting off the corpse's hand to use as a fingerprint was his as well. To be fair, scheme to frame the three-finger man of the murder had been in Kenzo's mind, but he had not come up with a precise plan on how to achieve that. He had the vague notion that if he buried the body where no one would find it, then eventually suspicion would fall on the three-finger man. There was a far That was as far as he got. Saburo took over embellishing and improving the station and the performance to perfection. There are people in this world with such a talent, and Saburo was certainly one of those. Rather than taking on the leading role himself, they are able to take the outline of the script, written by another, embellish it, editing it, offering advice and suggestions, and turning into a fascinating piece of theater. However, in the case of this murder-suicide, Saburo ended up going beyond the role of stage director. He couldn't help getting a little more involved. The situation played so much to his strength that in the end he just had to pull himself in the center stage too. He explained it this way. I'm planning to use the severed hand again. If anyone at all had suspected a suicide, I got Kenzo to hide it in the coffin so that I would be buried with the cat. Then the next night I snuck up to dig up again. That's when Suzuko had her sleepwalking episode. I looked up and saw her staggering towards me. I held out the severed hand with the three fingers to scare her. But I never dreamed of having to use that hand to do the same trick again. Uh, it was the meddling shampooed up Kosuke Kindaichi who forced me to it. It had been more serious, dignified kind of detective. I never would have acted so childishly, but he turned up just about the same age as me, looking so scruffy, and that feeble stammer. I got right up my nose that was swanning around, pretending to be a detective. Then he came and told me the mechanical tricks in locker room murders were boring. He challenged me. Thinking back, I realized now that it was a deliberate strategy. He fell right into his trap. Anyways, I just had to show him. I made up my mind to demonstrate my locker room murder trick one more time. I looked the scan I dug up on the night before. I dipped it in my own blood and made more fingerprints on the folding screen. Then I took it and reburied it in the cat's grave. After that, I put it on the performance for him. Obviously, I didn't mean to cut myself so deeply. I intended to accurate myself lightly with the sword. I performed the same step that my brother did, then cut the sword into a folding screen, and then tried to cut myself from behind, but I miscalculated somehow, and I gave myself a deep gash instead. If you take a look at the camphor tree in the garden, you'll find the razor I used instead of the sickle. The the long and short of it is that the young man Saburo was something of a psychopath. To him, flirting with Ed was amusing in the game. To the very end, he instead insisted that he had never had the slightest idea that Ketsu planned to murder Katsuko. It may as well have been the truth, but who's to say that he had known that he wouldn't have done exactly the same thing? Would it have made him hesitate at all? Saburo was of course charged, but while he was waiting judgment to be handed down, the political situation in Japan worsened. He was called up to fight in China, where he eventually died in battle. Suijian Suzuko also passed away the following year, but perhaps it was blessing that she did. Last year, their cousin Ryosuke went on a trip to Hiroshima, was unlucky enough to be there when. Oh, shit! Oh, fuck! Oh, man! that took a bit of a turn there, man. Ryosuke went to a trip to Hiroshima and was unlucky enough to be there when the atomic bomb was dropped. The village elder noted that this was also the city in which his family had died. They wondered aloud if this was some sort of fate, war having taken the father and finally taken the son as well. Ryushi stuck out the war in Osaka. He refused to be evacuated in his home village. He never liked the village life, and ever since the murder case, he had enough of an old way the life of a family in the Honjin. This day, the Graichi Yanagi residence is occupied by the dowager Itoko, along with her elder daughter, Taeko, who recently made it back to the Shanghai with no more than on her closet on her bar. The Branch family house is still home of Ryosuke's widow, Akiko. There are 3 children, but the gossip in the village is that no one sees eye to eye about anything, and that the arguments never end. And those are the facts of the Honjin murder cases. I must confess that I never intended to mislead my readers. I explained from the outset that the location of the waterway. Before writing the opening of the chapter, I wrote the following. I feel a debt of gratitude to the killer for devising such a fiendish measure to stab this man and woman. Of course, the man and woman I was referring to were the three-fingered man, Yoshi Shimizu, and the bride, Katsuko. Fuck off. Where Kyoshi was merely stabbed, I purposely refrained from writing who brutally murdered a man and a woman. If you didn't really assume that I was referring to Kenzo and Katsuko, then that is entirely your responsibility. In the same chapter, when describing the crime scene, I wrote the couple lying there soaking in crimson of their own blood. I wrote soaking in their own blood, but never did specify that they had both been murdered. I learned this device from my own reading of the detective novel, especially Agatha Christie's The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. And so, in closing, I was completing this manuscript. I paid one last visit to the Shigaragi resin. In my earlier visit, I had still been the chill of the early spring in there, and not a single shoot of green in the sight anywhere. The reset of the earth in the rice field had been bare, but now it was autumn, and as far as the eye could see, there was golden waves of ripening rice. I pressed it once again. Into the thick bamboo and finally had a southern view of the resin. According to my sources, the property taxes and the new agrarian reform had affected the Chianai family. They have been unable to ward off financial ruin. Regret it was a stretch of my imagination, but I looked out over the once grand home sitting in the shadow of the Honshin. I fancied and smelled the odor of decay. I turned my eyes slightly to look to the spot of the northeast edge of the property where 10 years earlier, Suzuko had buried her beloved pet kitten. The ground was carpeted in those deep red spider lilies, sometimes known as equinox flowers. I couldn't help imagining they were soaking in blood of poor, sweet Suzuko. The end. Well, that was an interesting story. It was an ending. As I said, I was expecting Saburo to be the killer, but man, it took me by surprise. It really took me by surprise, and I can see why this story is a classic. Anyways, I guess I'm gonna be ending the stream. I hope that you guys liked the story as much as I enjoyed reading it. If you're here, I mean. Anyways, I will be streaming with Necro and Ponth in a few moments. So thank you for watching and have a nice day. Uh, I would talk a lot more, but there's not a lot of people here that want to speak, so I will just say thank you for watching and or listening at least. See you later.